I don't even know where to begin. I don't. I'm the guy who thought Nebraska would go 10-2, had them in my own top 10, and there were moments of this game where I thought that Nebraska was legitimately proving me right, or giving me reason to believe that maybe they weren't a top 10 team, but looking at just their first drive, Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda catching a 32-yard bomb from Casey Thompson. Explosion. Game opens up 7-0. Huskers at some point lead 14-3 until Northwestern explodes in the second quarter. And then after that, it's 17-14 at halftime, and Northwestern, they get the ball at the beginning of the third. They have a chance to really ice the game and put the Huskers in panic mode. And that doesn't happen. Huskers force a 3-and-out. They get a touchdown. Northwestern makes a turnover or some sequence like that. And then Anthony Grant explodes for nearly a 50-yard run. And it's 28-17. Nebraska looks like they're in total control. And then a disaster of an onside kick happens. And yeah, from there, Cam Porter, Evan Hull pounded away, chew clock, and score. And that combined with Casey Thompson throwing a bad pass that was intercepted and returned 40 yards, and Wyatt Lever making a bad play, not catching a good pass, a very catchable ball, bounces off of his hands and into a Northwestern defender to seal the game. And it's 31-28. Northwestern is 1-0. They could go undefeated in the month of September and actually have a chance to have a successful year this season. Nebraska's 0-1. They're heading back and they're going to play North Dakota and Georgia Southern, so they'll get some wins before Oklahoma. And we'll get to some more of these thoughts that I have. I want to go more in detail. But if they looked this shaky, if their defense allowed over 500 yards to Northwestern, and if their offense sputtered the amount they did, and not just sputtered, I thought the offense for Nebraska did a pretty solid job, but in big moments, like Wyatt Lever dropping that pass, or Casey Thompson letting the pressure get to him and throwing that awful pick, in big moments, this Nebraska team still has not found a way to be clutch. Their 7th consecutive loss, another loss for Scott Frost in a close single-possession game. I don't know what to tell you. I, as someone who thought that Nebraska was going to be very good this year, and who knows, they still very well could be. There's a part of me that still thinks that they are. They're not as good as I thought they would be, but Northwestern, to give them credit, got to give Pat Fitzgerald and the staff credit, Northwestern looked far better than I could have ever imagined them looking. And yes, part of that was Nebraska's own inefficiencies, but part of that was also Northwestern look. Nebraska has talent at the front 7. They have a Garrett Nelson, Ochon Mathis, Caleb Tanner. Northwestern never allowed a sack. Peter Skornowski and that offensive line ate. Northwestern dominated the line of scrimmage, both on the defensive line and on the offensive line, and we'll get into more of this, of course. I just, for Nebraska fans, almost want to issue an apology. But I think it's too early to a certain degree for me to say that. Because Northwestern, who knows, they could be sneaky good. Nebraska could use this as a wake-up call. But this looks just, once again, typical of the Scott Frost era. I feel like almost nothing has changed, in a certain sense. Yes, great hires were made on offense. The transfer portal certainly had an impact because all 3 of Nebraska's starting wide receivers are from the portal. Their starting running back is from the portal. Casey Thompson, their quarterback, is from the portal. The only guy at skill positions for offense who wasn't a transfer this year, and he was a transfer, he just didn't transfer in this year, was Travis Vokolek, the tight end, who had 5 receptions for 63 yards. And he basically got half of his receiving yards that he had in his 2021 season, got half of them in this game. Travis Vokolek was eating, making great catches, really, really good tight end. I'm excited for him, and he'll do well at Nebraska this season, might even earn some all Big Ten honors, honestly, as a tight end. This loss means a lot. And I mean, every loss to a certain degree, especially with the coach who's under a hot seat, means a lot. And this win means a lot too for Northwestern. Their daunting schedule, which includes Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, you've got to travel to Maryland and Iowa. You face a lot of really good teams. Getting this first initial win and then playing Duke and other cupcake non-conference teams gives the chance for Northwestern to gain some momentum. Nebraska can regain some of their momentum because they have two very easy home games against, again, North Dakota and Georgia Southern before facing Oklahoma. But the onside kick, questionable call by Scott Frost, arguably took away the momentum, gave Northwestern some free points. Scott Frost also saying that the offensive staff has to be more creative in the Big Ten. What are you doing? If you want to call the offense, just say you want to call the offense. And judging by the fact that your onside kick decision, quite frankly, killed your team's momentum, meanwhile, Mark Whipple and the way that Nebraska was attacking Northwestern's defense, I thought, with the amount they were passing, it was Nebraska's best passing game in ages, even with the 2 picks, one of which was not Casey Thompson's fault whatsoever. Nebraska passed for over 300 yards, 355 to be exact. They had struggles on the ground. They also had decent pass protection, not the greatest, but they had good pass protection at times throughout the game. I'd say overall their pass protection was better than it was, for example, last year. Special teams, there were no issues with punting. They had a short 56-yard kick, but that's a long kick. They made all of their PATs, basic things. Special teams have improved. The onside kick, again, being Scott Frost's call. I'm not going to necessarily pin that on the special teams unit. I'm more so going to pin that on Scott Frost, though the special teams unit is to blame there. It's just, I don't know what to think, honestly, except for the fact that Northwestern, I underestimated them, and I have seemed to overestimate the Cornhuskers. And it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. If Scott Frost survives, one of my favorite radio hosts, Mike Valenti, said that if he loses this game, they're going to leave his butt in Ireland. And the word butt was replaced by something that I don't exactly want to say on my YouTube channel, but that's what he said. They'll leave him in Ireland if he falls 0-1. And I think that's a great exaggeration, but a loss is a loss, especially with the coach who hasn't had a winning season yet. And against a team like Northwestern, who many view as one of the worst Big Ten West teams, you lose this game, how many other Big Ten Conference games are you going to win? So lots of questions for Scott Frost and company. Let's start off with Northwestern. Talk about the victors and analyze them. 528 total yards. 314 of them were passing yards. 8.3 yards per pass. Ryan Hilinksi. People treated him like he was talentless. Absolutely talentless. And even though I didn't rank him very high, I always thought that, recruited at South Carolina, played at Northwestern last year. So coming out of the South, I thought that he would bring some talent with him to the Wildcats and probably do better this year than he did last year. Well, going 27 of 38 for 314 yards and 2 touchdowns, that is a pretty darn good case. That is a good game. I don't care who or what team it is against. That is a good game. Ryan Hilinksi played amazing. Evan Hull and Cam Porter played amazing. Northwestern's offense, outside of the one fumble that set up a Nebraska touchdown drive, their offense was pretty darn good. Passing, running, early on, Northwestern's pass game looked very system-based. They were 7 of 7, but for only like 30 yards. They weren't making many deep throws. But when they opened up the passing game, it was crazy. Donnie Navarro III, Raymond Nero III, or Nairo, man, they did it. They were fantastic. That was a bomb to Nairo III. it was a huge touchdown by Ryan Hilinksi and Northwestern. They were responding down 14-3. Northwestern dominated the line of scrimmage, and Ryan Hilinksi and that Northwestern offense looked much better than anticipated. The defense, too. They couldn't exactly limit Nebraska's passing attack. And Northwestern's secondary, with Brandon Joseph leaving for Notre Dame, we knew that the secondary position would be an area of interest. It'd be a very thin area for the Wildcats. But they brought in some transfer guys on the defensive line. Their linebackers, they had some returning production there. Their run defense was impressive. Nebraska ran for 3.5 yards a carry, but if you took away Anthony Grant's 46-yard rush, they're running for under 3 yards a carry. Well under 3 yards a carry, actually. Trey Palmer was limited. Jacquez Yant was limited. Casey Thompson, he was sacked a few times. He had one rushing touchdown that was on a 1-yard run. Didn't see as much of him running as I thought I might. The Northwestern defense and offense were both impressive. They both played a good game. Northwestern's concern, of course, was the penalties. 8 penalties for 65 yards. If I was to think anyone in this game would have more penalties than another, I would think it would have been the Cornhuskers, who are typically not disciplined with both penalties and things like turnovers and just total execution. But the Huskers were actually disciplined in some areas, and we'll get to that later. The Wildcats, they had penalties, they had a bad turnover, they had some bad play calls and some awkward decisions, but they got the job done. They won the Battle of TOP, they outgained the Huskers by close to 100 total yards. In the rushing department, they absolutely killed Nebraska. There's one photo where the Northwestern O-line has just built a gaping hole that's probably 5 yards wide for Evan Hull or Cam Porter to just run up the middle for a long gain. It was absolutely crazy. And that also highlights that Nebraska, just seeing how they defended the run today, they have problems at defensive tackle. And their defensive ends and pass rushers, too, they could not get home against a strong Northwestern O-line. So Pat Fitzgerald, very good coach with fundamentals, offensive line, defensive line. They're good with the basics. Penalties will be something that we'll have to watch for that team, but a win is a win. They're 1-0 in the Big Ten, 1-0 overall. What a great start for the Northwestern Wildcats, honestly. Now to the losers in Nebraska. And this is a pill that I have to swallow pretty hard, because not only did I pick them to win, I picked them to cover the spread. Nebraska was favored by 12 points entering the game. It flipped from 13 to 11, then back to 12 before the game began. Nebraska, they started out strong, 14-3, and when that happened, I'm thinking they could bust this game wide open. Honestly, the way their offense was playing was great. It was great, in my opinion. Even with the fact that they weren't running on the ground, the way Casey Thompson was throwing the ball, the way Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda, Trey Palmer, Alante Brown, and Marcus Washington, and Travis Vokolek, the pass game for Nebraska has taken a step forward, and you can credit none other than Mark Whipple and Mickey Joseph for that. You just have to. That was, by passing standards, even with the 2 picks to 1 touchdown, that was a good game by Casey Thompson. It was a good game. There were 1 or 2 throws that could have went the other way, but they didn't. And the 1 pick at the end of the game that was a pass to Wyatt Lever that bounced off his hands, that one I would not blame on Casey Thompson. Threw a bomb to Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda. He threw another bomb to a wide receiver whose name escapes me. I think it was Garcia-Castaneda again, where it's 3rd and 8. Casey Thompson is just looking for downfield. He's pressured, forced out of the pocket, scrambles, he's stuck, so he runs back, sets his feet, chucks it down the field, and Nebraska goes from being at their own, I think, 30-yard line around to the Northwestern 20-25. It was a good play, made a series of good throws. I was impressed by him and Ryan Hilinksi both, and you can credit the passing success that Nebraska had today. If you want to say it wasn't success, then that's on you, to Mark Whipple, who I think today proved that he was the right hire for the OC job. Yes, there were some decisions where runs up the middle, it's like, what are you doing? You haven't been able to run up the middle all game. But overall, the Nebraska offense, almost 500 total yards, two turnovers, but those turnovers and such I would more so blame on the individual players at hand than the offensive coordinator, per se. Watching what I saw, the Nebraska offense was functional. It could pass. It needs to improve at the line of scrimmage in order to run the football, especially that interior. Needs to improve at the interior to allow Anthony Grant to, get consistent 4, 5, 6 yard runs instead of having one long run and then just runs that are often consist of 2, 3, or even 1 yard of rushing. So I think that the offense for Nebraska did well. Here's the thing, though. Their secondary was awful. That was a bad secondary. Letting Ryan Hilinksi pass for 314 yards in the opener when he was not even named the starter. And I'm not discrediting Ryan Hilinksi here. He played a good game. He made plenty of good throws. A lot of those incompletions were drops by his wide receivers. He's a better quarterback than most are going to want to admit. The problem is that 41-yard pass to Raymond Nairo III was wide open. It was a busted assignment. Absolutely busted assignment. That secondary was falling behind Northwestern wide receivers the entire game. Whether falling behind, not being in correct position, that secondary was not a good secondary. You can tell that they lost Cam Taylor-Britt, Deontay Williams, etc., and they have not found guys to fill in and replace those guys. They just haven't. And their tackling is awful, too. There was a play where Ryan Hilinksi and Northwestern, I think they're 3rd and 5. 3rd and 5, I forget again if it's Evan Hull or Cam Porter, motioned out of the backfield, and no one's covering him. Absolutely no one is covering him. And Ryan Hilinksi looks, scanning down the field, there's no one open, but here's my halfback. Maybe he can get a yard or two. Well, Evan Hull, Cam Porter, because I forget who it was, tried to juke out the Nebraska linebacker that was tackling him, and I think that was Luke Reimer or Nick Henrich. Tries to juke him out. Originally, I thought the way he was going to juke out the Nebraska linebacker was a mistake, but the Nebraska linebacker basically tackled thin air, which allowed the Northwestern running back to get, a first down, which set up a Northwestern score. Nebraska had 110 rushing yards, 3.5 yards per rush. If you take away the long rush by Anthony Grant, it's much worse than that. They only had 1 5-yard penalty. The story is 3 turnovers. And the other story is the 25 minutes and 48 seconds of TOP. That offense, let me tell you, was impressive at times how quickly they could get down the field. The one fumble did kill their momentum. That was a drive that was going well. It was going to be Nebraska's response to Northwestern's deep bomb that brought them within 4 of Nebraska. And then the fumble happened. And then Northwestern marched down the field and scored their own touchdown. So Nebraska, they just keep making mistakes. Players keep making mistakes. And it's not just the players either. It's Scott Frost. That onside kick, what are you doing? You're up by 11. When you're up by 11, and Northwestern has a little bit of that panic alarm heading in, like going off in the back of their mind, make them drive 75 yards, not 40 yards. That was perhaps the most frustrating part, along with him slighting Mark Whipple and the offensive staff in the post-game press conference. It's just not good. The ramifications of this game. Scott Frost's seat just got a whole lot hotter. Absolutely. The majority of those fans in Aviva Stadium, well, they're Huskers. The Nebraska fan base is much bigger than the Northwestern fan base. The Nebraska fan base is much more invested. You had closer to a home game with the crowd attendance than not and you lost. And you led by 11 two times, and you blew both of those leads. You disappointed the Nebraska fan base because trailing by 3 at the half and then coming out scoring 14-0, 14 points in less than 30 seconds. Good defensive play, turning over, forcing Northwestern into a turnover after leading by 4 and getting a touchdown, and then Anthony Grant having an explosive run following that up. You deceived the fan base into thinking, oh my gosh, we're resilient. You deceived me. When it was 28-17, I thought that Nebraska had a great halftime speech, and they were rallying. It deceived me into thinking that Nebraska was actually mentally resilient and mentally tough and had made good decision-making and could correct their mistakes. And they still can. It's week 0. They're 0-1. There are 11 games left, and assuming that the Huskers make a bowl game, which isn't, you can never assume that with them, but if they do, you still have 12 more games. 12 more games with a chance to win in the majority, if not all of them, just by the way Nebraska played last year and the way Nebraska played this year in this one individual game. But Scott Frost's seat, he's lost too many close games. This was another humiliating loss with several turnovers, player errors, play calling errors, a defense that has regressed in exchange for the offense progressing. Everything seems to be more similar than different, especially the decision-making, which falls at the feet of the head coach, aka the favorite son in Scott Frost. If Nebraska looked this shaky against Northwestern, who was picked to finish last in the Big Ten West, if I'm not mistaken, how will they look against Oklahoma and Michigan, who I think are top 10 teams, and more legitimate top teams than Nebraska? Yes, I had Nebraska beating Oklahoma, but it's because it was a home game in Lincoln, a game that I think Nebraska was more desperate to win and would take more seriously than Oklahoma would, and because it's Brent Venables' first game against a Power 5 school on the road as a head coach. But Oklahoma and Michigan were two teams that I viewed as superior to Nebraska at the beginning of the season. And now I think it's the case that those two teams are likely not just superior, but obviously superior to the Huskers. We'll see how they play in their first few games, though. But Oklahoma, good quarterback, good offensive line, good wide receivers, Marvin Mims at wide receiver, Dylan Gabriel at QB, Bill Biedenbaugh and his O-lines are always good. A defense that under Brent Venables and Ted Roof should improve. They have a legitimate linebacker room. Michigan, their defense will take a step back, I think, but their offense is going to be a lot closer to, let's say, the Alabamas and the Ohio States of the world than the average person thinks. And that's not to say they will be at that level. They won't be, but they're going to have a near elite offense. These are two top 10 teams. How is Nebraska going to look against them? I think Nebraska's going to lose by 50, lose by 10 if they're this shaky against Northwestern. The bigger question is not by how much they lose by, but can they even beat those teams? Nebraska last year played every team close, but it didn't matter because at the end of the day they were still 3-9, and here they sit 0-1 against a team that many thought was one of the worst in the Big Ten. They have plenty of tougher teams left on their schedule. For Northwestern, the Wildcats, I need to talk about you more, so I'm going to talk about you more right now. Your coach in Pat Fitzgerald is a wizard. He is an absolute wizard. What he does with the limited set of talent that he has is fascinating. It's why he's one of the best coaches in the nation. And I've said that before. Very underrated head coach. Knows what he's doing. And I had them going 3-9 this year because of their schedule and because of partially how good I thought Nebraska was. And it was a huge game for Northwestern. I thought the most important game for Northwestern was this Nebraska game. Because by winning this Nebraska game, you can now start out 4-0, including a huge conference win, and get some confidence heading into the road game at Penn State, which is a winnable game. Hosting Wisconsin, which is a winnable game. Playing at Maryland and at Iowa. Hosting Ohio State. At Minnesota, at Purdue, hosting Illinois. Beating Nebraska, instead of losing to them, gives Northwestern a lot more hope to go bowling or even win the West than if they lost this game. It was a huge game for the Wildcats, and they won it. And they very well, and I think they will be 4-0 heading into their matchup at Penn State. They might be ranked in my top 25. They might be ranked in the top 25 nationally. We'll see. But that offense today looked legit. The defense did what it needed to do, forcing 2 turnovers on its own, taking an advantage of a player mistake to force a 3rd turnover, sacking Casey Thompson 2 times, dominating the line of scrimmage, especially the interior of the line of scrimmage. They were fantastic. So Northwestern fans, congratulations. I think you have a legitimate team. This game has changed my view on... Honestly, it's changed my view more of how good Northwestern is than how good Nebraska is. It still changed my mind on the Huskers, but it really changed my mind on Northwestern. They impressed me today in every way. And this leads into the last point. This game doesn't determine it all, but it mattered. It mattered. Absolutely mattered. For Northwestern, it's given them hope. They have an opportunity. Starting out 4-0, that is a third of your schedule. That is probably going to be wins guaranteed. And then you get into the hard part where the remaining 8 games, at Penn State, hosting Wisconsin, playing at Maryland and Iowa, hosting Ohio State, playing at Minnesota and Purdue, and hosting Illinois. And you have a chance, starting out 4-0, to win a lot of those games in the October and November slate, which will be tough, but they're winnable, especially after the performance that I saw today. And maybe Northwestern will find itself to win the West for the 3rd even year in a row, or at least be at the middle to top of the food chain if they don't win the whole thing in the West. For Nebraska, it's one game, and Nebraska's schedule still lines up favorably with it. They get a lot of matchups with teams at home, like they host Oklahoma, they host Wisconsin, they host Minnesota, and they play at Iowa, but hosting Wisconsin, who's the favorite to win the West, is huge. Hosting Minnesota is huge, and I think that Nebraska still has an opportunity here to do something in the West. But starting out 0-1, losing a conference game, especially in the fashion they did, it's not the mark of if not a good team, at least a team that has mental toughness the way they lost, and that can be clutch. And you need that. You need that to win the West. You need that to go 9-3, 8-4 in the Big Ten. You need that, and Nebraska today did not prove that. So Scott Frost's seat has gotten even hotter. Northwestern has hope ahead of it, and that is this video. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video, more specifically on this game. Tell me what you thought about this game down below. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys around. Bye.